A couple of nights ago, ladies and gentlemen, the governor did, another act of questionability by signing, didn't get a lot of play either. He signed the Humane Alternatives to Long-Term Solitary Confinement bill. Now, you might have read about this. It's known also as HALT, H-A-L-T. And the only word I would classify this is reckless. Reckless. No better person to talk about this than Brian Sullivan. He's the president, Nassau County Correction Officers Benevolent Association. Great to have you as always. You know, you and I, when we discuss things, it's tough, whether it be the corrections facility, whether it be an inmate against an officer. And I thought of this, Bill, and I thought of you in our prior conversation, Brian, because it really puts folks in harm's way, in my opinion. You're going to explain that. But, man, was I right using the word reckless as far as this? Good to have you.
Good morning. Obviously, as always, thank you for having me on. I appreciate the time to explain some of this stuff. And reckless that's a word. I have a few other words that I don't think we could say on the radio. But brought to you by the people who brought you bail reform and discovery reform and releasing cop killers on parole and, decriminalizing all the low-level crimes so you have all the spikes in crime that we see in New York City and everything else. We now bring you the HALT legislation. HALT legislation has actually been kicking around in Albany since 2014. But prior to the one-party rule and basically the tail wagging the dog in Albany, this legislation didn't go anywhere. And even as recently as 2019, Governor Cuomo himself did not really support this legislation because we've been very, very involved in this type of stuff with the governor's office. And I know state corrections, Mike Powers is the president of the state corrections. He's been intimately involved in this going back to 2014, trying to show how insane this is, how reckless this is. What the HALT legislation does is it basically takes away our ability to separate violent and predatory inmates and people that are in special populations, to separate them from the general population for a myriad of reasons. The two biggest reasons are, first and foremost, the fact that an inmate may request protective custody because he or she is afraid to be in the general population for whatever reason. And we have a lot of inmates in our jails that just want to do their time. They just want to come in. They don't want to get hurt. They don't want to be in harm's way for whatever their crime was, from soup to nuts. Just let me do my time and keep me away. And you throw them in certain areas with predators. There's people that are in there for murder. There's gangbangers, MS-13s, Bloods, Crips, everything else under the sun. They don't want to be anywhere near them. HALT legislation prevents us from putting people into protective custody. You have to put them in a new area that is yet to be built, that no funding is provided by the state to the local municipalities like Nassau County, Suffolk County, Westchester, unfunded mandates that are now being pushed onto the taxpayers of the local counties. They would be put into what's called an RRU, Residential Rehabilitation Unit. Now, that sounds fine on its face, but then you also have violent predators that commit acts, and now you can only hold them in administrative segregation after jumping through a myriad of hoops. You can only separate them for up to 15 days total. That's it. Then they would either have to go back into general population or into one of these RRUs. Now, who else is in the RRUs? The protective custody inmates. So what sense does that make? Then you have inmates that have diminished mental capacity, or they suffer from serious mental illness or psychosis, and they're potentially violent, or they are violent. They act out. Inmates with mental troubles cannot be segregated under the HALT legislation for any reason whatsoever. You cannot separate them for any reason, even for assessment of their acts or their mental status. They have to be put into either a medical unit, which is for medical just not even for observation, just a medical unit because of a medical problem, or they also get put into one of these RRUs. So now you potentially have a protective custody inmate, a violent predatory inmate, and an inmate suffering from mental illness in an RRU, which is supposed to be a therapeutic environment, and we're going to we're going to sing songs and we're going to have counselors in and everybody's going to hold hands and everything's going to be wonderful. That sounds like a recipe for disaster. That's a soup that you're putting together that is there just cannot be any, anything good that comes out of that. Now, this is all predicated on, listen, I'll say it straight out. This is all predicated on a lie. The people that sponsor this stuff, these advocates, they call themselves inmate advocates or incarcerated persons advocates. They don't want you calling them inmates anymore. They're advocates for incarcerated persons. This doesn't advocate for the average person in general population. This bill, this law now, advocates for predators in our jails, so they can't be held separate. I don't know how an advocate can stand up and say that they are against solitary confinement, they are against any kind of isolation. We want predators to be loose in the general population because they don't deserve to be there. Where is the advocate for the general population of inmates? Obviously, I'm an advocate for the correction officers, and we have our civilians. But you have people advocating to keep violent, predatory, mentally ill inmates in the general population. That puts the entire population of the jail at risk. Now, solitary confinement, they refuse to call it anything but solitary confinement. Solitary confinement does not exist in New York State. It hasn't existed here in at least decades, if not more. There's no such thing as solitary confinement. They want you to believe it's the Shawshank Redemption, it's Alcatraz. You throw people in a hole, you close the door, there's no light, they don't know what time of day it is, and you give them bread and water twice a day. And there's no human interaction, and they go in there and they're insane. That does not happen. That has not happened in New York in generations. What we have in New York is administrative segregation, which means you have to be able to separate people for these reasons that I keep talking about. Administrative segregation doesn't even mean you get put into a different cell or dormitory than where you are now. You're just limited in your interactions with other inmates. You're still in full light of day. You have access to televisions, law library, regular libraries. People in segregation have more access to services in jails currently prior to HALT than the general population does. They get seen by medical every day. They get seen by psychological professionals every day. They have the same access to mail and visitation and everything that comes along with it. Solitary confinement is a myth, and the people that just insist on ignoring us when we say it's a myth, they're perpetuating a lie, and the lie was bought into by everybody. And now, like I said before, the one-party rule in New York State, even as recently as 2019, Governor Cuomo didn't push this through because they made some changes through the State Commission of Correction. But now that we have the one-party rule and we have a governor that's in a predicament, this thing just gets pushed through because there's a fear of any veto being overridden by the legislature, which would effectively put the legislature in the governor's seat. Now, I don't know where this lands. Now, we had conversations. I belong to a coalition of other corrections unions, Nassau, Suffolk, Westchester, New York City, and even state corrections. It's called the Downstate Correction Coalition. We've had numerous conversations with the governor's staff, with the staff of the Senate and the Assembly, where we say some of the stuff that's involved in this, it actually makes sense. There's a training aspect that's there for our officers. You want to build rehabilitation units? That's fine. You want to build programs? That's what we're in business for. We're here to try and rehabilitate people that are incarcerated. Nobody's in prison to just lock them open and throw away the key, especially if they're going to be the largest population of people that are going to get released back into society again. You want to try and give them some sort of programs or counseling. But the way this is done is just throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Now, the governor himself has said, because we're talking about doing chapter amendments to this. The bill's already signed, so what kind of chapter amendments are done remains to be seen. It's important to note that, due to our demands and our concerns with the legislation going back, the governor has said that there is an agreement with the legislature to make amendments to the language. Even in his approval message of this bill when he signed it, He said that in order to protect all incarcerated individuals and the essential workers that staff these facilities, amendments are necessary to ensure that processes are in place to address all possible circumstances where an individual may need to be separated from other incarcerated individuals, especially when they commit multiple acts of violence. That all sounds good, but that should have been done with the help of the stakeholders, our people, before this bill was signed.
Brian, there's no question. You know, this reeks like bail reform because the same garbage was thrown out there. Then the epiphany came about. Well, we need to maybe tweak it a little bit. And look what has occurred there. It's not even a tweak that'll fix that thing. You know, I fear for the correction officers here.
Good job.
I'm glad the governor stated that, but you know what? That should have been in place here. And you're right. I am so sick and tired. Listen, I probably get one a day from these advocate groups that have the inmates at the top of the agenda as far as how they have or their rights have been thwarted and everything else. Who gives a rat's you-know-what,
right,
okay, regarding that? I care more about the guards, the officers, who now are put in harm's way because, as I say, because of radio, reckless. This is nothing but reckless legislation, and it's because of what we are seeing in the political landscape, Brian. You know it. It's the pandering of the progressive mindset. That is the only reason. You know, it's the same garbage with a Brandon Elliott out on the street, the nut job who stabbed his mother in 2002 and nearly killed that 65-year-old last week in Times Square, okay, because of policies that are in place, flimsy, on all fronts. That's what we're seeing right now.
We're a mirror, like a smaller version of Rikers. What goes on in Rikers Island now is an absolute sin, the way that correctional facility is run. The officers are being assaulted pretty much on a daily basis. They're working triple shifts because they don't hire anybody. We've had numerous assaults on officers in my facility in Nassau County, and we're on pace this year, especially because of bail reform. We're not, you know, our population is down, but we're holding the worst of the worst, the people that can't be released even under bail reform. So, you know, there isn't. It's funny. There's a dynamic that goes on in a correctional facility. You'll have the worst of the worst. You'll have middle of the roads, and then you have some lighter people that are in doing short time for whatever is there. Now you only have the worst of the worst that are playing off of each other. You also had the COVID stuff that's gone on. There was a lot of restrictions, there was no visiting and things like that. So the tensions are very high. We've had several assaults on my officers in the last. We just had a bad one last week. An inmate jumped on a guy's back and was rolling around with him for, a little bit before officers were able to come in and help him. Thank God. But the biggest problem with this halt stuff is exactly the same as what happened with bail reform. The people that actually do the job were never consulted on the operational way of doing this. It's just, we believe this is nice. We're going to take care of these poor people that are being abused, being downtrodden, which is a crock because that no such thing happens. But they did have some conversations, going back with state corrections. And state corrections is a different bird than the counties are because they hold all convicted felons in the state. The counties are different because most of our people are pre-trial. There's felons, there's misdemeanors, the whole thing. Not one county executive or sheriff was consulted by anybody about this, and the biggest problem is the unfunded mandates to build these new RRUs are being dumped on the counties. Now, I live in Nassau County. Nassau, Suffolk are some of the highest tax areas in the country. Does anybody think they're going to raise taxes to build residential rehabilitation units, even though the state law says it? They're going to cut every corner possible to make it work, and they're going to take from other areas. They're not going to add money to the budgets, especially after all the COVID stuff or whatever. They're getting their stimulus money. That's going to pay, past bills. It doesn't change the budgets going forward. We're still in a control period in Nassau County with a finance board controlling all the finances. So does anybody really think we're going to be building new jails with therapeutic areas where everything's going to be sunshine and roses and playing guitars? And it's not. They're going to rob Peter to pay Paul. They're going to do the least amount necessary to get it done, and we're going to lose in other areas. They'll probably take other inmate programs. They'll cut God only knows from where to say that they have these RRUs, and then you're going to have this hodgepodge of inmates in there, protective custody, mental health, violent, predatory, and the ones that are the worst of the worst that commit violent acts, MS-13, slashing people, whatever. You know, we've had inmates kill people in our jail in the past. The maximum time they can do in administrative segregation is 15 days, then they got to get put back. I don't know how any advocate in their right mind can say that they're advocating on behalf of the people in jail, can say that's a good idea when they're threatening the people that are actually in jail from predators, let alone I'm advocating for my staff and we have the civilians. I just don't get where these people are coming from, and they're getting airtime. You know, the moderates, the Democrats that are in the middle of the road, they all voted for it again. You know, all the usual suspects, they all voted for all of this stuff. It was overwhelmingly voted by the Senate and the Assembly, given to the governor, and he put his scratch on it. So now, after the fact, again, we're going to chase amendments to this.
Brian, I was thinking, we're doing Brian Sullivan on this, the whole legislation, which is just, it's unbelievable. You know, I was thinking, how are they going to pay for how could they pay for some of these other, you know, sidebars that possibly would work? Why don't they just take money out of the $350 million or so that they think they're going to get from the new pot bill? You know, that's another beauty, right? That's another beauty. You know, that's another round of play of the brainchild up there. So
when you look at the amount, that $350 million in a state budget, what does that really amount to? When they think it's the most wonderful thing, I could use $100 million in Nassau County to refurbish that's just the Nassau County jail, let alone the state budget, $350 million, so we could have everybody driving around on the highways and byways stoned out of their minds. But $350 million, by all means, you know, a fraction of a percentage of a percent of the budget. Whatever. That's
you know, and I can't wait for these devices to come out to detect, you know, if someone is actually inebriated due to alcohol or, you know, THC. Can't wait.
Right.
Can't wait.
Right.
When are those devices? It's great to think about it, but when are those devices going to be in play? Who knows?
Yeah. Let's think about all of that after we sign the legislation, just like all the rest of this nonsense.
Brian, it is an absolute disgrace. It really is to see what has occurred, and like I said, you know, the pity folks out there with the inmates and everything else at the center. I think of those correctional officers who now are in real harm's way because of this whole bill. They really are in harm's way.
There's actually one other aspect that I didn't declare that I didn't state on this. There's also a new designation of special populations within our jails. Special populations is anybody up to age 21, anybody age 55 and over, pregnant females, and mental health. They're all people that under the HALT legislation cannot be segregated for any reason whatsoever. So we talked about the mental health people. Obviously, pregnant females, that's a whole different bird. You want to separate them. They should be separated for obvious reasons. People that are up to age 21, who are the people that are up to age 21 in jails? That's your gangbangers. That's your MS-13s. That's your Bloods, your Crips. Under this HALT legislation, they cannot be segregated for any reason. I'm 55 years old. I know plenty of 55-year-old guys that go to the gym and they're in great shape, and especially if you're in jail, they think they're trying to portray them as decrepit old senile people that need to be taken care of. Plenty of 55-year-old guys in jail that'll kill you in a second, but they're exempt from this legislation. You cannot separate them, segregate them for any reason.
That's a good point. Great point. Brian, we'll keep on top of this. Gut-wrenching stuff. Unfortunately, when you and I converse, it is about some of these tactics that are in play, and you wonder, you know, this is the show of common sense. I have yet to see anything as far as what occurs in Albany these days and signing this stuff into law. I mean, it's just unbelievable. We got to keep talking about it. Brian Sullivan, what a job he does as the president, the Nassau County Correctional Officers Benevolent Association. Look forward to more conversations, my friend. We'll keep an eye on things. Tough deal going on here.
You got it, Jay. Thanks for the time. I appreciate it. Have a good weekend. Talk to you soon.
You too. Happy Easter. Thank you so much. Listen, it's like, where is the thinking going on here. You're not seeing it. You're just not. And as Brian said, you're putting everybody together in the population. Okay? And think about those correctional officers now. Okay? There have been beatings. We talked about it with Brian last time. Beatings that have gone on regarding officers. Now everybody. It's one big party happening over at these facilities now. And there is no thought process involved.